All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel, and we look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern. Try to size them up, figure out how to use them, and today is our 551st video that we've done on Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system of theory. Mr. Larson proposed his two fundamental postulates in 1959 about how he believed the universe operated. First postulate states that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. So basically, Larson proposed that the universe is made out of motion. And motion was the relationship between space and time that is a reciprocal relationship. All of our scientific quantities are merely fractions, with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator. Larson, before his death in 1990, ended up writing books on chemistry and physics and astronomy and many aspects of those subjects, as well as a book on metaphysics, including philosophy, religion, psychology, and biology. And he also wrote 2 books on economics, substituting in the same ideas, the universe of motion, an economic system of motion, with the 2 reciprocal aspects being production and consumption. And we are looking at one of his books on economics today called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. We're right in the middle of chapter 13 called Cost Inflation. If you want to get caught up here on this book, you probably want to go back about a month in the archives and start with chapter 1. If you'd like a little bit more explanation about the reciprocal system and how it works, I'm going to go back to one of my first 474 videos on the reciprocal system. And in there, I will give you a little bit more discussion about how Larson uses his fundamental postulates and plugs them in, creates a theoretical universe, and then compares his theoretical universe with the actual empirical universe of modern science, and compares the two. But for now, I'm going to be reading from chapter 13, Cost Inflation, here in Larson's book, The Road to Permanent Prosperity. Some further consideration of the inflationary aspects of various economic actions will be appropriate at this time in order to round out the theoretical treatment of the subject. Inasmuch as the discussion on chapter 12 was directed mainly at money inflation, the kind of inflation that is responsible for the business cycle with its accompaniment of depressions, recessions, and assorted economic ills, we will now be concerned primarily with cost inflation. As pointed out in the preceding chapter, inflation is simply the automatic reaction of the economic mechanism to attempts to get something for nothing. It enforces the conservation law and effectively frustrates all of those attempts. But the conservation law applies only to the situation as a whole. It does not prevent certain individuals from getting something for nothing at the expense of other individuals. Actions of the kind that cause money inflation are aimed at getting unearned income, pure something for nothing, for their beneficiaries. Actions of the kind that cause cost inflation are mainly aimed at getting more income, more earned income out of nothing, that is, increasing the income of those who participate in the production process without any actual increase in production. Inasmuch as the conservation law requires the books to be balanced from an overall standpoint, those who earn income must pay the bill in either case. but as a whole, they also receive the benefit of the actions that cause cost inflation, and these actions therefore accomplish nothing except to favor certain income earners at the expense of others. Money inflation, on the other hand, takes from those who earn income in order to provide unearned income for the beneficiaries of the inflationary measures. Real purchasing power, ability to buy goods, cannot be created out of nothing. In spite of the numerous assertions to the contrary that emanate from front-rank economists, it can come only from production. It therefore follows that if any purchasing power is made available to individuals or agencies in any other manner than as payment for participation in the production process, that gratuitous purchasing power must come out of the earnings of those who do participate in production, either as suppliers of labor or as suppliers of the services of capital. The mechanism of the inflation processes can easily be seen by inspection of the economic flowchart. As the chart indicates, the dilution of the money purchasing power stream by money inflation occurs after the act of production, and it therefore creates an unbalance between market price and production price. Because of the unearned money injected into the stream, the consumer has to pay a price in the goods market that is higher than the price established at the production end of the mechanism by the payments for labor and the services of capital. The buying power of earned income is therefore reduced. In cost inflation, the dilution of the money purchasing power stream occurs before the act of production, and it therefore affects production price and market price equally. In this case, then, the average buying power of earned income is not reduced. All that has been accomplished, aside from favoring some individuals at the expense of others, is to change the money labels. It might be well to mention that the term earned income, as used herein, refers to payments for labor or the services of capital utilized in production. This term is frequently restricted to income from labor only, but from a purely economic standpoint, labor and the services of capital are equivalent items, differing only in the time factor. The definition which restricts the adjective earned to labor only is based on another of the social distinctions that have made their way into economics, much to its detriment. The remainder of this chapter will present a brief survey of the principal economic actions that produce cost inflation or deflation. Some of these items have been discussed previously, but we will now want to look at them from a somewhat different angle. Heretofore, we have been interested primarily in their effect on the general operation of the economy. Now we will examine them specifically from the standpoint of their effect on the price levels. In beginning this discussion, it will be desirable, as a matter of clarifying the general background, to give some consideration to two kinds of economic actions that are not inflationary. One of these is an increase or decrease in the volume of production. According to Principle 9, the volume of production has no effect on the price level, and hence changes in volume have no inflationary or deflationary effect. The general impression that we can take care of an excess of money purchasing power by producing more goods is totally wrong. Such additional production adds equally to the purchasing power and to the volume of goods produced, and does not change the ratio between the two. Price increases, which are popularly viewed as the principal villains on the inflationary stage, likewise have no inflationary effect, and all of the effort that is put forth to block them, whether it be a strident call for restraint emanating from the White House, or a boycott of the local supermarket organized by aroused housewives is completely wasted. As has been emphasized throughout this work, the general market price level is a resultant. It is the quotient that results from dividing the rate of flow of money purchasing power by the rate of production of goods. If the president succeeds in intimidating the steel companies to the point where they roll back the price of steel, or if the housewives succeed in persuading the supermarket to reduce the price of beef, all that is accomplished is to raise the price of something else, because those actions do not change the rates of flow in the two economic streams. And without such a change, the general price level must stay just where it is. The causes of inflation are actions that increase the flow of money purchasing power without a corresponding increase in the volume of goods produced. Price increases are simply the result of such actions. They do not increase the flow of money purchasing power and therefore have no inflationary effect. But wage increases, increased many compensation, increased maybe money, it says many, but increased money compensation for the same amount of productive work do increase the flow of money purchasing power and are therefore inflationary. Here again, as in so many other places in the pages of this book, the conclusions of the analysis will be distressing to a great many persons. According to our findings, wage increases, which are very popular, are inflationary and raise the cost of living for everyone who does not receive the increase in pay, whereas price increases, which are universally detested, have no adverse effect at all, and are merely a means of putting into effect the inflation due to the wage increases and other inflationary actions. Blaming the manufacturers and merchants who raise their prices instead of the individuals who demand and receive more pay is like blaming the tax collector who presents us with a high tax bill instead of the Congress that levied the tax. In current practice, the negotiation of a new pay scale for any large group is normally accompanied by a rather heated controversy as to whether the proposed changes are or are not inflationary. The truth is that all wage increases are inflationary. That is, they increase the general price level. However, the average productivity per man hour is slowly rising, and this has the opposite effect, reducing the price level. If the average nationwide increase in wages does not exceed the average increase in productivity, these oppositely directed effects on the price level cancel each other, and in this sense, it may be said that wage increases, thus limited in amount, are not inflationary. No one has to pay any higher prices than he did previously. However, if the increase is selective, as it always is under present conditions, it is inflationary from the standpoint of those who do not receive the benefit of the higher wage, as it prevents them from getting any of the additional goods that are being produced. The foregoing conclusions as to what the effects of price and wage changes theoretically must be are amply confirmed by a host of experiments that demonstrate what these effects actually are. Throughout the world, nations are faced with rising prices because they are trying to maintain a higher standard of living than their production will support. The most common governmental response to public complaints about high prices is to raise wages and forcibly roll back the prices of critical items. Of course, these actions are not officially labeled as economic experiments. Nevertheless, they are economic experiments. They are actions taken in the expectation of accomplishing certain specific economic results. And since there is no advance assurance that they will succeed, they are experimental. The mere fact that no one actually says, "This is an experiment," does not alter the situation. The results of these oft-repeated experiments are always the same. Price controls do not keep the general price level down, and wage increases cause further inflation. No country ever halts its inflation by these easy and popular measures. The only effective remedy is to bring income and expenditure into balance by increasing production or by some kind of a program that brings expenditures down to the level that the existing production can support. One of the principal criteria by which scientists judge the validity of the results of an experiment is the reproducibility of these results. That is, whether other workers who carry out the same experiment arrive at the same results. It is therefore worth noting that the economists and the governments that they advise are not only undertaking a wide variety of economic experiments, in spite of their insistence that meaningful experimentation is impossible in economics, but they are also, in many instances, establishing a remarkable record for reproducibility. The results of the myriad of economic something-for-nothing schemes, including the attempts to combat inflation by wage increases and price controls, are perfectly reproducible. They never work. Increases in Social Security payments, unemployment compensation, welfare, etc., transfer payments, in the language of the economists, also add to the total flow of purchasing power and are inflationary. In this case, however, there is no net inflationary effect if the funds are obtained by taxation or non-inflationary borrowing, inasmuch as these measures reduce the money purchasing power available to consumers and are deflationary. If the transfer payments are financed by borrowing from the banks or by issuing currency, there is no offsetting deflationary effect, and the transactions as a whole are inflationary. A higher productivity rate, more production per equivalent man-hour, is deflationary, inasmuch as it reduces the labor cost per unit of product. That is, it lowers the production price, as that term is used in this work. The distinction between increased volume of production and increased productivity should be recognized. A greater volume achieved by working more hours adds as much to the purchasing power stream as to the goods stream, and it therefore leaves the price level unchanged. An increase in productivity, on the other hand, adds to the volume of goods but not to the purchasing power stream, and thus reduces the price level. Higher productivity, if it can be achieved, will offset some of the cost inflation resulting from wage increases or other causes, while conversely, a decrease in productivity or a slowing of the normal rate of increase will aggravate an inflationary situation. An increase in business taxes adds to production costs in the same manner as an increase in wages, and therefore results in cost inflation. The ultimate incidence of a tax on business is almost identical with that of a sales tax. But since the business tax is concealed in the price of the products and is not usually recognized as a tax by the consumer who pays it, whereas a sales tax is very much out in the open, the tax levying authorities prefer to tax business to as great an extent as they consider feasible. A somewhat amusing side effect is that many of those who are strongly opposed to sales taxes because of their regressive nature are among the most ardent supporters of taxes on business, which are even more regressive, as they are not subject to any of the exemptions that are usually introduced to soften the impact of sales taxes. To most people, it seems obvious that if taxes are levied on business enterprises, they are paid by those businesses. The economist realizes that this superficial view is wrong, that business enterprises, as such, do not and cannot absorb any of the costs that they incur. All such costs must ultimately be borne either by the customers or the stockholders of the enterprise. But the inexact methods of the economic profession have been unable to produce a definitive answer to the question as to which of these two groups actually pays the tax. Samuelson expresses the uncertainty in these words, quote, "Economists are not yet in agreement on the final results. Some think the corporate income tax falls mostly on the consumer. Some argue that it falls mostly on the stockholder or capitalist. Some split the difference between the two. Some toss a coin, and some throw up their hands in despair," end quote. The concept of the isolated producer can be of considerable assistance toward getting a clear view of the incidence of the business taxes. As explained in Chapter 11, this hypothetical isolated producer operates in the same manner as the average producer in the individual enterprise system. That is, it must obtain all labor and capital services from private suppliers. It must compensate the suppliers of capital at the current rate of interest, and it must distribute all of its income, actually or constructively, to the suppliers of labor and capital services, so that the result to the productive enterprise itself is zero. It is clear from the points brought out in the preceding pages regarding the operation of this isolated producer that any change in production price must be accompanied by an equivalent change in market price, and that the income from sales of goods must therefore necessarily equal the expenditures for productive services. Inasmuch as the rate of payment for capital services is fixed, neither wage nor tax increases can be made at the expense of these payments. The full amount of any cost increase must therefore be added to the market price. No restraint on the part of the producing organization itself or forcible action by the government to hold down prices can alter this situation, because it is the additional payments for wages and taxes that swell the money purchasing power stream and thereby raise the price level. Unless some offsetting action, such as the imposition of higher consumer taxes, is taken to absorb the additional money purchasing power generated by the tax increase, prices must rise. As the conditions under which this isolated producer operates are also those that are applicable to the average producer in the American economy, these conclusions also apply to the existing economic situation. Business taxes are paid by the consumers. The question then naturally arises, why do most economists fail to recognize this fact? Reynolds gives us an explanation that throws some light on the situation. Speaking of what he calls the traditional view, that these taxes are paid by the stockholders, he says, quote, "The reasoning behind this conclusion is simple. Under either monopoly or competition, the intelligent business manager will adjust his production and selling price to make maximum profit. It will not pay him to alter this adjustment, even though the government decides to take away half his profit in taxes," end quote. It seems almost incredible that such an argument would be raised in all seriousness, inasmuch as it rests on the preposterous assumption that an additional cost imposed on his competitors will not alter the business manager's estimate of the price that he can charge for his product. Everyone knows that the competitive process is geared to the rate of profit, and the economists at least recognize that the average profit must approximate the interest rate with only limited modifications, depending on the current stage of the business cycle, because of the mobility of capital. If average profits fall below this competitive level for any reason, the competitive pressure relaxes. Prices then can be, and of course are, raised to the point where the normal profit rates are restored, a fact of business life that can easily be verified by a look at the record. This means that the entire amount of an addition to the business tax is promptly added to the price paid by the consumer. Even without the analytical aids developed in this work, such as the concepts of isolated producer and the conservation of purchasing power, the ultimate incidence of the tax should be clear to anyone who faces the issue squarely. It is hard to avoid the conclusion that those who contend that the tax is paid in whole or in part by the owners of the business are being influenced by their emotional reaction. Their conviction that the owners, the capitalists, ought to be taxed. The basic reason for this inability to understand the tax situation is a distorted view of the position of the producer, personified in the owner or manager of the producing enterprise, in the operation of the economy. To the economist, the producer is in the driver's seat. It is he who makes the decisions. It is he who determines what he is going to produce, how much of that product his enterprise will turn out, and how many workers he will hire, what he will pay for them, what he will pay them, and what price he will place on the product. Much of the antagonism which the academic economist displays toward business, particularly toward big business, is due to his distaste for the criterion by which he believes that these business decisions are made, the profit motive, as he calls it. But in the real world, very few of the economic decisions that the businessman makes are decisions in the sense in which the economist is using the term. The only major economic decision that he actually makes is whether or not to undertake production of a particular kind of goods. This is a genuine decision. Here, the producer decides what he is going to do. But once entry into the business arena is accomplished, further decisions of the same kind, except in minor matters, are impossible. The producer can no longer decide what he is going to do. All that is now possible is to figure out, to the best of his ability, what he can do. He cannot decide to produce X units per day of product A. The best that he can do is to conclude that the prospects of selling X units per day justify beginning operation on this basis. If his analysis of the situation was wrong, he must adjust his operations accordingly, even if this means closing down entirely. He cannot decide to hire workers. He must hire the full number. I think the word would be hire more workers. He must hire the full number that he needs to produce X units of his product, and he must not hire more than he needs. He cannot decide what he is going to pay them. The wage and salary scales are determined either by the pressure of competition, by law, or by labor negotiations. He cannot decide to sell product A at price Z. All that he can do is to estimate that he can sell his output at that price. If this estimate is wrong, he must either alter his price or his volume of production, or both. The truth is that the producer operating under the individual enterprise system is subject to an extremely rigid set of controls, and he has only a very limited range of economic options. He has considerable freedom in technological and organizational matters, and his primary objective is to manipulate these factors in a manner that will put him in the most favorable relative economic position. The explanation of the successful operation of the system lies in this very fact that most economists seem unable to see the fact that the ordinary producer can improve his own position only by actions that increase productivity and thereby benefit the consumer. He cannot achieve such an improvement by the kind of actions that the economists believe are his main concern, economic actions aimed at getting a bigger slice of the pie. Of course, some producers have the benefit of monopoly positions of one kind or another, but in almost all cases, these are either recognized as being in the public interest, established with the consent and under the control of the consumer, or illegal. The producer who receives a subsidy likewise occupies a preferential position, but such concessions are within the control of the government or the public, not the producer. Okay, that is the end of the chapter there on cost inflation. Now, I'm going to go back and read this paragraph again because I have about a minute and a half here, and put in some of these parentheticals. The explanation of the successful operation of the system lies in this very fact that most economists seem unable to see. The fact that the ordinary producer can improve his own position only by actions that increase productivity and thereby benefit the consumer on the basis of the values determined by the consumers themselves. He cannot achieve such an improvement by the kind of actions that the economists believe are his main concern, economic actions aimed at getting a bigger slice of the pie. Of course, some producers have the benefit of monopoly positions of one kind or another, but in almost all cases, these are either recognized as being in the public interest, patents, etc., established with the consent and under the control of the consumer, brand name products, etc., or illegal, in which case it is the fault of the community if they continue to exist. The producer who receives a subsidy likewise occupies a preferential position, but such concessions are within the control of the government or the public, not the producer. Okay, that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 14 is called Business Cycles. We'll start that tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today.